Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to do a little bit of a podcast type video. Um, the background to this is that several weeks ago I had the pleasure of having a private conversation with Geek Gamers and Solar McLaughlin. And we were talking about our gaming, and one of the things we also briefly touched upon was that over the last maybe 24 months, I've been doing quite a lot of stuff for TDE, the Dark Eye, das schwarze Auge. And Geek Gamers told me that she had seen the English rulebook in her local gaming store. And she was wondering, was it worth buying? Was it worth acquiring? In her case, considering that, of course, she does a lot of solo role-playing game. And I said, without actually elaborating, because we had so many other things to talk about, that I didn't think it was worth it, considering a couple of things. Number one, that she is a solo gamer. Secondly, that I know that she has a plethora of solo RPG books, but also books from other gaming systems that are not necessarily made for solo role-playing, such as she has an extensive collection of Dungeons and Dragons stuff, Blades in the Dark, which can be played solo. I guess that they actually have some information on how to play it solo. And I saw recently on Drive Through RPG that there is a fan-made free supplement, if you like, that allows you to play Blades in the Dark solo. There was actually a lot of stuff out there. But also considering that she has so many solo books like Scarlet Heroes, like Iron Sworn Delve, all of the other books and game systems that she has been featuring, that I simply decided that I couldn't really say, yes, go out and spend, I don't know, 40 euros or $40 or however much it is, probably more like $60 on a book where I don't think it lends itself easily to the solo DM. But of course, that doesn't mean that one couldn't talk about it and maybe even reconsider my verdict. And that's what I'm going to do now. So first of all, the Dark Eye core rules is more like the Pathfinder first edition core rulebook. And I'm citing Pathfinder first edition because I haven't seen the second edition books at all. So I don't know what they look like. But in the first edition Pathfinder, you had one rule book, and that contained everything, all of the information that was required for the dungeon master as well as the players. Unlike, for example, Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, and again, I can only talk about the 4th edition because I haven't seen the 5th edition books in their entirety. I only have the player's handbook. I have no idea what the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition provides, but in 4th edition, it came out with 3 core books: the Bestiary, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Player's Guide. The Pathfinder book, I remember when we first got the first edition, was one hefty, big book which contained everything that you needed. Later on, I also got the the Dungeon Master's Guide, which gave a lot of information on how to run games. And I think it's a really good book, but you can play without it. So if we compare it to 4th edition D&D or Pathfinder 1st edition, the rulebook for TDE is a lot more like the core rules for Pathfinder, which means that you have plenty of stuff in there that is required. So you have all of the stuff around character creation, and there it might be interesting for the solo player if they want to create a TDE character to play in their solo campaign. And I totally think you can do this. With regard to the way the gaming system works is, and I am going to do a history of TDE video where I'm going to explain how the gaming system has evolved, because it is different from Pathfinder, but even Call of Cthulhu or Dungeons and Dragons, in that you don't only roll one die or a percentile die in the case of Call of Cthulhu, which is translated into rolling 2 dice against a stat, but you roll 3 dice. You roll 3d20 and you need to roll under your skill. And your skill, for example, picking locks, consists of 3 attributes. And the 3 attributes come from the list of basic attributes that everyone has, such as strength, intelligence, I think they call it sagacity in English, TDE, courage, etc. And for each of these attributes, you start out with a stat that is 8 before you start creating your character. And there's an upper limit to beyond which you cannot raise the base attributes. So let's say you want to pick a lock and you have 3 attributes that you need to roll against. So you roll 3d20s, and you cannot decide which of these 3d20s you assign to which stat. So the first one that you roll, and you roll them in sequence, goes against the first stat. The second one goes against the second stat, and the third one goes against the third stat. Or you can roll 1d20 3 times in a row and then just assign them sequentially. Or I just have 3 different colored dice and I just take them in the order of the first letter of the color. And then you compare the value that you have rolled to the value of your attribute. If you roll under, everything is fine. If you roll over, you have failed that particular roll. However, you've also got talent points, so which you can increase over time using experience points. And as you do so, you can use those talent points and say, okay, well, in the first instance, I was supposed to roll a 14, but I rolled a 16. So I over-rolled by 2. So I just take 2 from my talent pool, 2 points, and say I've managed to do this. Then the second roll and the third roll are also checked. And if you still have talent points left, at the end of doing these checks, you then determine your quality level. And that is the number of remaining talent points divided by 3. Now that sounds quite complex, but it isn't really. It's something that you just need to get used to. As a matter of fact, if you play Iron Sworn, you also roll 3 dice. You roll 2 d10s, those are your challenge dice, and then you roll the, I think the 1d6 is called the action die, and then you have to do comparisons there. That is also something that takes a lot of getting used to. But again, it sounds complex when you first read the rules or when you see somebody explain it. You kind of go, what? But it makes perfect sense within the system. It's just something that you have to get used to. Also, another difference, which a lot of people dislike, is the fact that unlike combat in D&D, for example, where you roll to hit, so you roll on your attack stat, whatever that is, and then you check against the armor class of the victim, as it were, to see do you hit them. That's not how this works. First of all, you roll to hit. If you manage to hit, they get to either dodge or parry. If they parry, for which they have to roll, then if they, for example, critically parry, there are different house rules as to how you deal with that. But it's always 2 rolls. So that actually means that when in combat you roll a little more than in other areas. And that can mean that combat can drag out. I don't mind it. I actually enjoy it, especially since there is a deterioration of your parry abilities over the course of the round. So if I attack enemy 1, they get to parry. If somebody else attacks the same enemy in the same round, their parry is reduced by 3, and so on and so forth, until their parry is 0. So if you hit them, let's say 6 times, definitely the last 3, if you manage to hit them, will actually go through. So I really like that, but it's a very simulationary or simulatory approach to combat, and not a lot of, and some people really dislike it. And there have been modifications made by people who have created alternative rules for DSA or TDE. One of them is called Ilaris. I read the rules and I actually don't think that they are an improvement at all, but you can buy them, but they're not available in English. So what else does this book bring you? It brings you all of the information about the different races, about the different classes. So the clerics, the magicians, the magic users. So here we've got guild mages, 3 types, black, white, and grey. We have witches, we have druids. I don't know if the druids are actually in this book. They may not be. It explains how different skills work, what the talents are, how does writing work, blah, blah, blah. How can you specialize? All of this information is in there. So it's really heavily centered around building the character. Which of course is important because without characters playing role-playing games efficiently and effectively is quite difficult. It also contains spells, it contains a small bestiary, it contains archetypes. So if you say, okay, I want to play such and such a hero, you can actually take them from the book and use them. It contains the liturgies for the clerics. Interestingly enough, not all of the 12 clerical classes are in here because you have a pantheon of 12 gods in the general pantheon. There are other side gods and lesser gods and demigods. But the great pantheon is 12 gods. Interestingly enough, in this base rule book, not all of them are present, which is very, very strange and which a lot of people have put down to greed on the part of the authors, saying, well, you know, they just wanted us to just buy an additional book, which did come out later, called Aventurisches Götterwirken. And there's now a second volume of that. So it's all about the Aventurian gods. So the fact that half the gods were missing is, of course, kind of weird. But you have all kinds of roles that you can play. Spy, sailor, I'm just looking at them, performer, rogue, prostitute, madame in a brothel, courtier, gladiator, knight, hunter. You have the different areas of the world where people can come from, and they are very, very different. So different people from different parts of the world can only perform certain things. Some if you like, classes aren't open to everybody. Which I find really interesting, but some people say it's very restricting. But I think it's actually a lot more realistic than saying, oh yeah, like in D&D, oh yeah, and then I will multi-class, and then this person, the ranger, also knows how to cast spells. Where you kind of go, no, why would they know this? This is very strange. So it's a lot more strict on the one hand, but also a lot more diversified on the other, because when you just look at the number of classes and the number of things that people can become, it is unbelievable. And of course, they all come with profession packages, because you have to have certain skills and certain talents as a basis to do certain things. And if you don't have them, then you can't become a certain class, which in my opinion makes perfect sense. That doesn't mean that it's all pre-scripted. You do have adventure points left that you can use to customize your character, as it were. And some of these are really just guidelines. So I was building a mage the other day for an adventure that I will be participating in, and I decided to go for a black mage for the first time in my life. And I found this, and I found a couple of spells that come with the package. And I was like, what do I need them for? And the DM was like, well, you would use them if you were going to start invoking demons. And I'm like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not interested in this. And he said, well, then in that case, just don't take those spells, because they are the prerequisite for becoming an invoker, which I'm not going to do. I want to concentrate on fire magic. So I just decided not to take those spells at all. I got the AP, the adventure points back. And I can now spend them on something else, which makes perfect sense and which makes much more sense for my character. Then it talks a little bit about healing, about illnesses. You get a couple of beasts in there. It's a very short bestiary. How do miracles work? How does karma work? What are the blessings for all of the clerics and so on and so forth. So it's also got a list of herbs, a list of I guess things like poisons and stuff. What it does not have is, and this is I think why I was thinking of Geek Gamers, it doesn't have tables. I mean, when I say tables, of course there are lists. There are extensive lists of weapons. You have pictures, I think, for almost every single weapon that is in the book. And of course, that's a list. And I suppose you could go and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to just roll on this and just make a decision which weapon I find, or which weapon my character has. But it's really one of those things that this book doesn't do. It doesn't really tell you how to create your own adventures or I guess encounters, whereas the Dungeon Master's Guide for 4th edition D&D does that at great length. The Dungeon Master's Guide also contains information on non-combat encounters, so what I would call social combat. It talks about traps, it talks about puzzles, it talks about how to create your own adventures, adventure settings, setting personality, setting details, outdoor settings, mapping the site. It talks about rewards, both experience points rewards, as well as, for example, weapons that they find, parcels that they find. So I think this is very, very different in terms of the outlook of the book. The book, the TDE core rulebook, does not contain all of those tools that you would need to build your own adventure. One thing that I really struggled with when I first came back to TDE from Pathfinder and D&D was that there is no challenge rating. The different monsters don't have any challenge ratings. It's very difficult if you have never played before or haven't played in a long time to gauge how difficult it's going to be for your party to fight a certain monster or certain monster group. And I remember that my first party that I was leading through a TDE published adventure perished almost on a daily basis. And I was like, well, I don't understand this, because this is the party's strength level, so they should be able to handle this. This is their abilities, and these are the monsters, and they should be matched. It wasn't matched at all. And I didn't even use the special abilities of the monsters because I was a bit overwhelmed, because they were quite, there were many things that they could do that I hadn't read up on. So still, they got hammered every single time. So this idea of how to balance encounters, how to build encounters, isn't in the book at all. That doesn't mean that it's not important, because it is. It's just not something that is in the core rulebook. So if you are a solo player and you just want to build your own encounters and you want to draw on TDE, I don't think that this book is going to give you much. It's going to give you a lot if you're interested in building a character, let's say a sailor, and using the skill set. But then again, you have to bear in mind that the skill set and the package, if you like, the sailor package, the prostitute package, or whatever it is that you want to play, relies upon you building a character in the frame of TDE, which means you have to have your attributes, you have to have your skills, and you have to have the 3 D20 skill test. Otherwise, it won't work. Because I don't think, at least from my point of view, that there is enough fluff in the book. It's very heavy on crunch. I would say it's 90% crunch, 99% possibly, to let you immerse yourself in the world, because the world itself isn't even described in there. So there is something about how to prepare your adventures. And that is 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. 4. That's not a big deal of information in there. So these, and then of course you do have tables that explain how there is a penalty on if you're in a if you're using a short reach weapon and the area that you're in is cramped, all of these kinds of things. So when I said that there aren't any tables, I just meant that there are no tables on which you can roll. For example, the infamous trinket table, which Geek Gamers uses quite a lot because she's really fond of this. Or I see in front of me a building. What is it like? So I roll. It's made of stone. And I roll again. It's a library. All of this stuff isn't in there because, of course, it isn't made for the solo player. That's why I wouldn't really say that if you have a lot of game books already, you should add this to your collection if you're a solo gamer. What I will say is that TDE is a really, really great system, which I really love. However, and here I have to harken back to a video that I did maybe 1.5 years ago, unfortunately, the English market has not been given all of the information that is required to play it, because most of the world is described in other books which have not been translated and probably never will be translated. And this means that you're losing out on the richness of the tapestry that is Aventurien, that has been woven over the last 40 or almost 40 years, because this is the only role-playing game that has a living history and a living story that has been told over 3.5 decades and has been recorded over 3.5 decades. And I think that is what sets TDE apart from all other role-playing games. Having said this, you can enjoy the tapestry using a different rule set. So as I said, there is Ilaris, which is based on TDE 5. There are other simplified rule sets. None of them are available in English, but they are available, that you can use to reduce the complexity, especially if you want to play older adventures, because the whole system has changed considerably from 1983. And I'm going to do a history video on this to explain also how TDE came into being in the first place and how it has changed over the decades. So this is my take on TDE, the core rule books. If somebody asked me, do you think me as a solo RPG player should get this book? I would say no, because it doesn't really provide you with the wherewithal to create your own encounters and to create your own stories. However, if you're a collector and you're just interested in what's out there in the market, then I would say yes, get it, because it is quite different from other gaming systems. So that's all from me for today, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.